guys. Today I want to tell you about the crown of the coast. So let's start. Steve Junak sits in the back seat of the Toyota 4Runner, his eyes trained on the green gold blur of Central California vegetation like a gambler glued to a slot machine. What just grasped to most people are sages and rushes and rice to Junak. Those sedges might be round fruit sedge or split on sedge. Some of them he can distinguish from a distance, others he might have to hold in his hand and squint at. It's not easy to stump a man who spent 37 years as a herbarium curator at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. Even out here on the Nature Conservancy's New Jack and Laura Dangermond Preserve, which boasts some of the highest numbers of rare species in the region. Is Iscoma on your list? Junak asks her companion Laura Rich, the preserve's restoration manager, who is scanning a checklist of plants in a binder on her lap. We just passed a bunch of Isokma Coast Golden Bush. Sure is, says Rich, as the vehicle pulls off to the side of the dirt road, high up on a ridge overlooking the Pacific. And here's Ancelia too, Junak says, hopping out of the vehicle and pointing out the yellow blooms of bush sunflower. This is a gold mine. Junak takes a full census of the botanical jackpot they have discovered on this June morning. Morning glories to the left, coffee berries to the right, and monkey flowers straight ahead. Rich and Junak record the GPS coordinates of native plants that will provide seed stock for some upcoming coastal prairie and oak woodland restoration projects on this 24,000-acre preserve, which TNC acquired in December 2017. The purchase was made possible by a $165 million gift, the largest single philanthropic gift in TNC's history, from Jack and Laura Dangermond. It marked the first step towards safeguarding this iconic property at Point Conception, Southern California's elbow, where the coast bends northward to San Francisco. The Conservancy had tried and failed to purchase the property in the past. It was one of the last large, privately owned and still undeveloped coastal tracts in Southern California, making it a rarity amid one of the country's most expensive real estate markets. The folds of this ecological fabric are home to 5 different major ecosystem types, whose range has shrunk dramatically across California during the last half-century because of development. The spacious list for the preserve so far includes some 662 plants and animals, 13 of which are threatened or endangered. That's just on land. The waters of Point Conception are, in addition to being a legendary surf spot accessible only by boat, a state marine reserve with thriving Gorgonian corals, elephant seals, gray whales, and dense kelp forests that drown in sea otters. The preserve is also a living piece of California history. Formerly known as a Bixby Ranch, parts of it will continue to house a working cattle operation as it has for the last century, and the preserve will provide protection to sacred sites of the Chumash people who lived here for centuries prior. The process of fulfilling this vision of stewardship has only just begun. Turning a 19th century ranch into a Tennessee preserve is a little like buying an old mansion and giving it a good renovation. It looks great from a distance, but there's a lot of work to be done on the inside. Plans must be drawn up, permits applied for, contractors hired, seeds collected. And even though the property looks very natural and intact, there are areas that need to be restored. Damaged wetlands, habitat for endangered plants and animals, and sensitive dune habitat infested by non-active species. Landscape assessments like the one being conducted by Junikin Ridge are also showing preserve managers which areas harbor invasive species ripe for removal. Creating a preserve of this magnitude is complex, and the work can only begin once you are handed the keys, says Michael Bell, director of the Dangermont Preserve for TNC. Besides the land assessments, there are a couple dozen buildings strewn across the property in various conditions. Turning them into usable facilities is a matter of finding out which lights turn on and where the plumbing still works. On a broader scale, TNC and Jack and Laura Dangermont share a vision that includes making the preserve a living laboratory that will draw researchers and students from nearby University of California, Santa Barbara, and other universities. With the help of the Dangermonts, the owners of Geographic software company S3, the vision is for this place to become one of the world's most studied preserves, outfitted with environmental sensors to better understand the impact of climate change on the region's natural resources. Even in a state with dozens of TNC preserves and projects, the scale of the Dangermont Preserve and its role in the cultural and biological landscape mean that it will be managed in a new way. The first objective is to preserve it, then determine how access can be managed to advance conservation, science, and education. The Dangermont Preserve will be managed and studied in a way to guide future conservation efforts around the state. We don't want it to be just a new nature preserve, says Mike Sweeney, the executive director for TNC in California. We want it to be much more than that. Just a few years ago, the future of the property, California's last perfect place, as the Los Angeles Times described it, was far from certain. This remote range had remained largely undeveloped for a century, an idyllic reminder of California's past, and most locals assumed it would always stay that way. But a turbulent real estate market put it all at risk. The Bixby family first arrived in California from Maine amid the gold rush of the 1950s. They bought huge swaths of land in Los Angeles County and Orange County for ranching and farming. Then, in 1912, Fred Bixby purchased the 9,000-acre Goju Ranch in Santa Barbara County, uniting it with the 16,000-acre Jalama Ranch 27 years later. Bixby Ranch stayed relatively unchanged over the years, so change was all around it. During World War II, the U.S. government acquired about 86,000 acres to the north to create an Army training base, which would later become Vanderbank Air Force Base. For decades, Hollywood stars and business tycoons have been buying up huge areas around Santa Barbara, often called the American Riviera, with its gorgeous vistas, mild temperatures, and perfect weather year-round. Oprah Winfrey spent nearly $29 million on a horse farm 3 years ago, and Ellen DeGeneres bought the house right next door a few months later. Back in 2006, amid the real estate bubble, the Bixbys put their ranch up for sale. The Conservancy scrambled to piece together the funds to buy it and turn it into a preserve. We made a valiant effort but didn't come close, Bell says. Unbeknownst to TNC, Jack and Laura Dangermond were also tracking the fate of the property, concerned about its conservation. I think for both parties, it was the one that got away, says Bell. An investment firm based in Boston snatched up the ranch, and locals and conservators got worried. For about a decade, the community watched as signs began to spring up of potential development on the ranch. 8 miles of some of the most magnificent coastline in California is prime real estate, but, says Bell, it also holds plenty of constraints to development. Water scarcity, remoteness, local opposition to building, and the strict regulatory environment of the California coastal zone. In 2016, Bell realized that he might have an opportunity that conservationists rarely get. He might get a second chance. There were signals that the new owners were potentially open to selling the property. The only problem was that TNC still needed the money to buy it, and fast. We talked to some potential donors, but we couldn't get traction, he says. Enter Jack and Laura Dangermond. Jack's parents were Dutch immigrants who ran Dangermond's nursery in the city of Redlands, east of Los Angeles. After Jack pursued his graduate studies in landscape architecture in the late 1960s, he and his wife Laura founded Environmental System Research Institute, known as ESRI. The technology company developed software that would become the most widely used scientific mapping program in the world. In 2016, he and Laura signed the Giving Pledge, vowing to donate more than half of their personal wealth toward philanthropic causes, particularly geographic education and land conservation. The Dangermonds, who had spent part of their honeymoon in a pub tent of the coastline east of Bixby Ranch at Refugio State Beach, had been interested in investing in conservation in the region for a long time. After some initial discussions with TNC, they called with a proposal. Bell got the call from Jack, hoping that they would be willing to make a donation toward acquiring the ranch. He didn't realize they would found the wall draining. I dropped the phone, Bell says. As TNC was finalizing the deal in December 2017, a brush fire began near the city of Santa Paula, about 100 miles east of the range. Strong, dry winds fanned the flames west toward Ventura and north into the Los Padres National Forest. Over the next months, the Thomas Fire burned 281,000 acres of land, destroyed more than 100 structures and caused an estimated $2 billion in damage, becoming the largest wildfire in California's history at the time. For Bell and Dangermonds, the disaster drove home the point that climate change was irrevocably altering the Golden State, and it was more critical than ever to understand how its ecosystem were being affected. With the Dangermond Preserve, they realized that they had an opportunity to establish a living laboratory on the closest thing to coastal wilderness in all of Southern California. This place belongs to science, Dangermond told Bell at the time. The Dangermonds plan to work with TNC and use their company's expertise to create a digital twin of the property to monitor and model how the landscape is affected by climate change. Separately, TNC's lead scientist for the preserve, Mike Ryan, is working with researchers to use archival surveys and photographs to get a better understanding of how the ecology of the ranch has changing over the past 100 years. The properties connected natural systems and undisturbed habitats along the southern California coast simply no longer exist anywhere else. We want to steep ourselves in the history of this place, Raymond says. But the preserve will also be about planning for the future. Not only is it a biodiversity hotspot, says Reynolds, it's also a place to think about how we adapt our conservation strategies as species redistribute themselves with climate change. Additionally, the way cattle are managed on the property will be studied and fine-tuned, adapted as a tool to manage native biodiversity. That knowledge could be applied across California's grasslands. Natural history photographer David Lisberger specializes in revealing the smallest details in an ecosystem. This summer, he spent many days digging in the dirt and wading the waters at the Jack Laura Dangermond Preserve. He was shadowing nature conservancy researchers Walter Heady and Larry Serpa as they took a survey of species that reside in the preserve's shoreline in coastal oak habitats. The photos near the Point Conception Lighthouse Ridge indicates the area where the organization plans to restore more than 300 acres of land now covered in ice plant, a succulent from South Africa that blocks out native species by forming dense mass on the dunes. It's an ambitious effort, perhaps the largest ice plant eradication ever attempted, and will potentially require an army of volunteers to yank the stubborn plant from wetland areas. It's going to be a big challenge, Rich says. Volunteers all will be enlisted to collect acorns in order to replant 200 acres of oak woodlands. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Have a nice day and goodbye.